Hello, my name is Craig, and today we're going to do a quick guide to SCSS. Now, you probably know quite a bit about CSS already if you're looking at this video, and SCSS is the next level up. Now, first of all, before we get into this video, you're going to have to excuse my voice. As you can hear, it's going already. I've got some kind of weird throaty thing going on, but I need to make this video to explain some stuff to you. So we're going to go through this stuff today. We're going to go through getting started with pre-processing and what it is. We're going to go through partials, imports, variables, nesting, mixins, extends, and operators. Now, don't worry if you don't understand what any of those things are. I'm going to go through all of those things in this fairly short, quick guide about SCSS and where to start with it all. So we're going to start with getting started, obviously. We're going to talk about pre-processing and what it actually is. SCSS is pretty much the de facto standard now for preprocessors and CSS preprocessing. There is also less LESS, but it's not used as much in the industry anymore, and most people have adopted SCSS. The place to find out a little bit more information about it is to go over to this website, sasslang.com, or there's many other websites you can go to as well, but this website explains quite a little bit about it. Now, also, there's two different versions of SCSS. There is Sass, which is this website, sasslang, and there is also SCSS. When you're using either one of those two things, you'll have a slightly different file extension on the end. So you'll have .scss or .sass. Don't worry about the difference for the minute. Sass and SCSS, the two things, are kind of used interchangeably, which makes things a little bit more confusing as well. But we're going to be using pretty much the industry standard, which is SCSS, and most of this website as well talks about SCSS. So before we begin, we need to install Sass, because SCSS is a CSS preprocessor. So we're going to take some CSS that we'd normally write, we're going to run it through something else. In this case, we're going to run it through Sass, and we're going to output something at the end of it. The reason you do this is for many reasons, really, but the main reason is because it allows you to do tons more powerful stuff with your CSS, such as making variables, so you only have to declare a color once, such as adding and subtracting, such as nesting things in a much more advanced way as well, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But first we need to install it. So you're going to have to come to a page on the internet called sasslang.com/install. It's one of the easiest places to find it. And on this page, it's going to give you a bunch of different options to be able to compress and pre-process your CSS that you're going to write. As it says here, there's a couple of ways to get started using Sass, or in our instance, SCSS. There's two ways, really. There's an application, which is the one on the left-hand side, or there's the command line option. We're going to go for the command line option, but I'm going to briefly talk about applications as well, because some of these are great. I personally recommend the Koala one, which is completely free, and it's a good place to begin, just to get started really quickly with SCSS and to try and play about with it. The other one that most people talk about is CodeKit. CodeKit is beautiful, by the way, but it does cost a little bit of money. As you can see there, it costs $34, but it is really nice to use. But I think for the sake of it, for how difficult it is to set it up on the command line, I think it's worth getting into good habits from the beginning and using the command line. I've already got it installed on the command line, but this is what you do if you wanted to install it. I'm going to go through the node method on a Mac computer in Terminal, so I've opened up Terminal here. And the way to install it, and by the way, this page also gives you instructions, the exact same things I'm going to go through right now. To install it, you first need Node installed, so you need to check that you've got Node installed. And then once you've got that installed, you just type npm install -g. The reason you use -g is because then it installs it globally on your computer, and you can use it in any location on your terminal. And then you just type Sass, like that. When I press enter, I'm not sure what's going to happen because I've already got it installed. It seems to be installing again, so good. So you'll get some kind of screen like that, and then it'll say it's installed, blah, 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 and you are done. That is the first bit of installing Sass. Dead easy, right? So now we're going to make a structure, and I'm going to make this in Atom, so we actually have something to compress, and we actually have something to pre-process with Sass. So I'm going to jump over to Atom now. I've already got a folder. I've already made a folder inside my sites folder. As you can see here, I'm in my sites folder already, and I'm just going to navigate to that folder so we can begin to do some stuff. which is that very folder there. And I'm going to make a couple of folders in here. If you've seen any of my other previous videos, you'll know that I like to make an assets folder, and under the assets folder I like to put my images folder, my SCSS folder, my CSS folder, my JavaScript folder, and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to do the same for this video too. So I'm going to start by making an assets folder, and then I'm going to make two folders inside here. For the purpose of this video, we only need two. Normally you'd have images and JavaScript and other things like that, but we're not doing any of that stuff in this video, so I'm just going to make a CSS folder, and then on the same level I'm also going to make an SCSS folder. So we've got two folders in there, and finally I'm just going to make an index file. It's not really relevant for this video, but it is good practice to make an index.html file in any project that you're doing, because your website won't work without one. Then I'm just going to put some boilerplate content in there. Oh, not HTML4, Craig. But we're not going to be using this. This purely is a video to show you how CSS preprocesses and some of the basics in SCSS. So we won't ever even look at this file, but it's still good practice to make one. So I'm going to make one and call it a quick guide to SCSS. And then I'm going to copy that and put that in H1 here too. And I'm going to turn off my notifications so you can't see strange things popping up at the sides. There we go. Do not disturb. Let me remake that. There we go. So we're not going to use this, but I've made it anyway. And we're also just going to make two files so we can begin, and so I can show you how this stuff works. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a file called screen.scss, and remember the extension for an SCSS file needs to be .scss or .sass, but the syntax is slightly different for Sass files, and I'm not going to talk about that in this video. So we've made that, and now I'm going to make in fact no, I'm not going to make a CSS file because it's going to get populated in a minute, so we don't need to make that. So now we've made the file, but if I start writing stuff in this file, say I put a reset in here, a really basic reset, and save that, nothing had happened. For a couple of reasons really, because I am not watching for it pre-processing, but we're going to do this all on the command line like I said before. So the next thing we need to do now is just set this up so it's watching this folder for changes, and you'll see in a second that a screen.css file is going to pop into the CSS folder. So we're going to come back over to terminal, and we're going to run a couple of commands in here. We're going to first of all write Sass. Because we've installed Sass on the command line, we can now type Sass and get access to what it does. So we're going to type Sass, and then we're going to type -- watch. This basically watches a folder, which is exactly what we want to do. I'm going to find my assets folder, find my SCSS folder, and that is the folder that I want to watch. But we're not finished writing stuff yet. Now I'm going to type a colon and then put the output of where I want the file to be saved when it outputs. Because the thing with SCSS is that once you save an SCSS file, that's not the file that is used in a web browser. It produces a .css file, hence the term preprocessor. So I need to find a folder as well where I want the output of that file to be produced. Because I've made the CSS folder, that's where I want it. So I'm going to put assets /CSS like that. And now finally I'm going to put -- style, and then on the end of here, for now, I'm going to put expanded. I'm going to explain this in 2 seconds, but just for the sake of this, I'm going to do this, and then press enter, and it'll inform me that it's watching for changes, and you'll see there that it's made a CSS file. So from the .scss file I made, Sass has pre-processed, so Sass has ran through the .scss file and produced and written a .css file. So if I was to be in my index file now, and if I was to link up the file, I'd still link to the CSS file, not the SCSS file. You see there? I'm linking to the .css file because that is the output that I want to link to. So now I've got this file, I'm going to open up to the right, so you can see me doing both of these things at the same time. I'm going to open up to the right the .scss file. Sorry, the .css. Wow, it's getting really confusing saying .scss and .css. So this is the CSS file that's produced, and this is the SCSS file that I am editing. Now the first thing we're going to do in here is I'm going to put a reset in. So I'm just going to use my auto-completing atom, and I'm going to write a reset. And I'm just going to do a really basic reset just to begin with, like we did before. And save it. You see how that's updated there? Because on the terminal here, if I jump back to the terminal, I've ran Sass watch. It is watching for changes inside the SCSS folder, and whenever I save this file or any other files inside the SCSS folder, it automatically produces the CSS file, which is the file that we linked to in the browser. So whenever I make any changes to this, if I delete all this and save it, it deletes all that. If I put this back in, it shows it all again. So I'm going to put a more advanced reset in here so we can see how this is outputted, and so I can show you the different ways you can output your CSS. So I'm going to jump back to my browser, and I'm going to download Eric Meyer's reset, which is just a little bit more complicated so we can see it. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, copy, and paste this into here like this. As soon as I hit save, you see it's produced it there on the right hand side. It looks exactly the same in this example here because I've not done anything different yet. There's 4 different ways you can compress your CSS when it is being processed. So I'm just going to stop this from running by pressing Ctrl and C, and I'm going to rerun this command, but on the end here I'm going to change the style. There's 4 different styles you can output your CSS to with Sass. There is nested, compact, expanded, and compressed. Expanded is the one that we've just been doing. It is basically just the default standard. It just produces the one on the left like this, and then outputs it exactly the same on the right. What we're going to do is try some of the others. So we're going to try style nested instead, and then I'm going to hit enter to get it to watch again. Now I'm going to save this file on the left, and this output changes slightly on the right. You'll see it's subtly changed, but not by much. So you can see there that it's changed the layout a bit. It's moved up the closing curly bracket to the end of the line, and I've not done that. So it's changed it a little bit, but not much. It shrinks it down ever so slightly. So I'm going to close this again, and I'm going to run it again, but run it with a different style this time. And we're going to run it with compact this time. Hit enter and watch for changes, and I'm going to come back to here and save this file. And you'll see that's much smaller. You see how it's put everything on one line like that? This is a good standard to use, but if we're going into production, if this website's going live, the final standard is the one you want to use. So I'm going to go back to terminal and stop this and rerun it again. And the final style is compressed. Compressed is going to completely smush everything to one line. Go back to here and hit save. And look at that. It gets rid of all the comments, it puts everything all on one line, and it looks much better like that. So that is the standard you want to use in production. For this video, I'm going to stop this again, and I'm going to use a compact style just so you can see what's going on the right hand side as I'm saving stuff. So that's how you get started with pre-processing. And now you'll see whenever I save this, it updates this on the right hand side, and that's the basics of SCSS. It is a preprocessor. It is running the SCSS, compressing it, and then doing something to it on the right hand side and giving us a CSS file that we can use in a web browser at the end of it. Obviously that's not just it. If that was it, there'd be no point in using SCSS. So the first thing we're going to look at now is partials. If you've done a little bit of PHP before, you'll know that includes is a thing in PHP. If you haven't, ignore me and don't worry about that phrase. But partials and imports basically allow us to include other pieces of CSS inside our CSS. So I'm going to copy this out of here now, and I'm going to make a partial. So inside my SCSS folder, I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it _reset.scss. The reason I'm putting an underscore in there is because the underscore signifies to Sass that it is a partial and it won't make a new file in the CSS folder. If I rename this, rename this without the underscore like this, and put some stuff in here, you can see already it's made the reset.scss, and we don't want that. So I'm going to rename this again with the underscore. With an underscore is how you signify to Sass that you've made a partial, and that's what we want to do. So the thing that I copied out of here, the reset, I'm going to go to my reset partial now and paste it in there like that and save it. And I'm going to go back to my main screen.scss and I'm going to import this by doing @import, open quote marks, and type reset, and then put a semicolon at the end. This thing on the right hand side here, when I hit save, you'll see it won't change. Nothing changes by doing this, because all I'm doing is including a file into my CSS from another location. This is a really powerful piece of SCSS, and it's something you'll use a lot because it allows you to keep your SCSS really modular and not make some big old giant document, and it makes things much easier for you. So make sure you get used to using partials and imports and things like that. I'm going to make another one now, another partial for the next example of the thing I want to explain, and that is variables in SCSS. So variables are just pieces of data in SCSS that you can store, and they're really, really useful. So I'm going to make another file in here, another partial, and I'm going to call it variables, when I can spell variables properly, like that. And then I'm going to come back into here and import it again, like so. And inside here, I'm going to make some example variables. So the first example variable is going to be a really simple example. It's going to be site background. My spelling is terrible today. There we go. And I'm just going to put black in there, like that. 000 is an example of black. So I've made a variable there, and I can use that throughout my screen.css because I've imported it into here. I can use that throughout my file. So I'm going to make a section in here called universal. I always like to have a universal section in my CSS where I include stuff like body styles and basic type styles and things like that. So I'm going to make a universal style, and then I'm going to set the color to be my site background, like that. And on the right hand side here, you can see that it's produced the color. It's found the color in the other file, and when it's come to processing the SCSS file and making my ultimate CSS file, it's found the color and copied it into there. So variables are really useful for storing pieces of data that normally in normal CSS you just keep copy and pasting over and over and over. And one of the really good advantages of SCSS is it allows you to finally be dry with your CSS. Don't repeat yourself. That's what dry means. Don't repeat yourself. So anything you reuse over and over, you can set as variables and keep reusing them. So for example, you might also have a site font family. Well, you can set that in a variable as well. So say for example we had it like this. Can't spell Helvetica either. So say we had that. In here, under our body, we could set font family like that. And you can see there that it's outputted that from the other variable file. So variables are really useful, really powerful, and I'm not even beginning to show the ultimate power of them here, but you can get the kind of idea that you'd use them for. I mainly use them for colors like this. They're really powerful for colors, and I use them in every single website that I build. I use them for font families and font colors and font types and things like that as well. And I also use them for setting global widths or global heights, basically global numbers. I use them a lot for that too. So the next thing I want to talk about is nesting. Nesting is something that's really, really powerful inside CSS. This is and I'm going to have to talk this out while I'm saying it. This is a section about nesting. What nesting allows you to do in SCSS is to do something that you normally do in standard CSS like this. So if I had a class called nesting, then I'd do this, target the H1 and maybe change the color to black or something like that. And then I might want to target the bold tags inside there as well, something like that. And then I might want to target the bold tag inside the H1, and then we'd have to do something like that. And it can get really tedious really quickly writing CSS like that. Well, the beauty of SCSS is you don't have to write it like that. You can nest values inside other values like this. So if I only want to target the H1 like this inside nesting, I nest it inside the nesting thing like that, and then I put color black and save it. And you see here on the right hand side, it automatically, when it processes the CSS, when it processes the SCSS, the result looks okay and it works as I'd expect. And then if I wanted to target the strong tag inside a H1, I could do exactly the same again. And it automatically processes it and it produces the result for me like that. Again, this is another really powerful tool inside SCSS, but you have got to be careful with nesting. This comes with a massive warning. Please be careful with nesting, because you can start to nest things too deep. Generally, as a rule of thumb, I always say to not nest things any deeper than 2. So this is kind of okay, but do not go any deeper than this. For example, I could go another level deeper and change the color to black again like that. But you start to see on the right hand side here, we're getting way too specific with our CSS. The output is way too specific, and it's probably going to cause us problems in the future. So don't go any levels deeper than 2 with nesting. It is a really powerful tool though, and it's something you'll probably use with SCSS. But what I tend to find with people when they first start using SCSS, like you, because you're watching this video, people tend to get carried away with nesting and start nesting everything. Often you don't need to nest things, and what people tend to do is that they'll have maybe a nesting header like this, and then they'll have a nesting body like this, and then they'll have a wrapping div like this. But what they'll do is they'll put both of these things inside the nesting div like that. But that's not necessary, and it also makes your CSS too specific, because it means you can't use the nesting header outside of the nesting. So just be careful when you're using nesting when you're first playing with it, because you can get too specific with things and cause yourself massive headaches further down the line. Next, let's talk about mixins. Mixins are really powerful. Another really powerful thing in SCSS that you'll probably use a lot. I have to just be quiet when I'm talking like this, otherwise it doesn't work. So mixins are basically little functions inside SCSS that you can do stuff with. I'm going to make a really simple example here for you. To recognize a mixin, you always type @mixin, and then say you want to change all your headings to be a particular size. So heading size, and then we give it a size like this. This is a popular thing that I do throughout my site. I don't usually make a mixin for it, but whenever I'm targeting H2s or H1s, I always like to target the whole lot of them at the same time. So by doing what I'm doing here, this allows me to target all of the H1s from H1 through to H6 all at once. So this example mixin here like this, what this is saying is it's going to change all of the heading sizes to the size that I specify in here. It won't do anything like this by itself. As you can see, it's not produced any CSS. But as soon as I make a new section, so say I've got my nesting section again, and I want to target all my heading sizes, so to actually reference a mixin, you put include. So I do include heading size to EM like that, and save it. You'll see it produces that CSS on the other side. So it's gone inside the mixin, it's found the CSS that's in there, and it has dumped my value here between the brackets inside the actual parameters. This is a really basic example of mixins, but you can probably already see the power of it here like this, because it'll allow me to put stuff anywhere I want. Now if I move this mixin, so I'm going to move this mixin further up. By the way, if you're ever using mixins in your SCSS, always put them near the top, because it means that you'll be able to use them throughout the rest of your document. I'm going to move that there. So if I wanted to target my basic font sizes, my basic H1s and stuff, I could do something like that. And when I save it, it targets all my H's like that. And then when I came down to my nesting thing further down, maybe I want to target those as well. I want to change the heading sizes to 1.5 EM or something. And you can see there it's done all of my heading sizes and made them 1.5 EM. So this is a really simple example of a mixin. As I said, they're like functions in SCSS. This is something of a rabbit hole in SCSS. No, it's very, very much a rabbit hole in SCSS, and you can get very carried away with them and do all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm going to leave you to explore them. It's probably not something that you'll use when you first start playing with SCSS, but trust me, when you start to really get into SCSS, this is where the power really lies, and you can make fancy grid systems. In fact, most grid systems that you find on the internet, particularly Bootstrap and stuff like that, rely on mixins to be able to get them to do stuff. One final thing, or the next to final thing I want to talk about, is extends. So extends is another really powerful thing in SCSS, and what extends allow you to do is copy some styles from one thing and move them into something else. So I've got this example here, the nesting thing, and say I wanted to make another nesting thing, maybe a nesting alt like this, but I want all these styles that's inside here to be inside here. In SCSS, I just type extend and then type nesting, extend dot to notify the class, and close that. And you see there, it's applied my nesting alt class to all of the same things as what the nesting is. Then I can also just put some other classes under there as well. Maybe background size, maybe background color. And it still does them all. Nesting alt further down, it's added that as well. So extends basically allows you to copy and paste some other CSS from somewhere else in your document and use it inside another thing. There's also another way you can write extends as well, by denoting them with a percentage symbol. So if I had a bunch of CSS that I didn't want to do anything with by default, so let's say we've got a button, I denote it like that, and if I denote it like that with the percentage symbol, it means it isn't outputted to the CSS. So if I then put some CSS on this, like 1 pixel solid black, maybe put a background color of red on it and a color of white. If I save that, you'll notice that the button is not outputted into the CSS, but I can use the button class in here. For example, I can do extend the same way again, but this time I use the percentage symbol and save it, and it produces the CSS. So it works exactly the same way. It copies all of the CSS outside of this thing and puts it into another place. This is another way you can start to use the dry principle, don't repeat yourself, in other ways inside your SCSS. Generally, I'll make a mix of using these two methods. Sometimes I'll use the percentage symbol. If I don't want to use something that's already existed, I'll make a bunch of styles like this and use the percentage symbol. If I'm copy and pasting something from something that already exists, that's already in my CSS, I'll use the dot because I'm just copying it from nesting and putting it into the nesting alt example below. Finally, the one thing I want to talk about really quickly, because these can get really confusing, is operators. So operators lets us add and subtract things. There we go. And what we're going to do with these is exactly what I've put above. We're going to add and subtract some stuff. So this is where the operators in SCSS come in really useful for making grids and stuff like that. So say if I had a variable of width, and my width of my website was 1200 pixels like so, I might want to make a grid with those at some point in the future. So my container width for my site might just be width of width, like that. And then you'll see the outputted CSS on the right hand side, it's width 1200 pixels. Now this is just a standard variable at the minute. If I change this to percentage, for example, it changes it on the right hand side. If I change this to 100%, it's just updating a variable. There's nothing special about that at the minute. But then it starts to get special if I start to make some grid items. So say I have a default grid item and I'm using a 12 column grid on my website. I need to work out the width of one of those columns. Now I could work out that out with maths in my calculator and then put the end result values into my CSS, but I don't want to do that. I want to make it more dynamic than that. So for me to do that, I can just take the width, which I've got above, which is pixels, and I'm going to change the width in here to be the width divided by 12. like that. So because I've got 12 columns in my grid, and my grid item only wants to be one width of those columns, I did width divided by 12, and the end result on the right hand side there is 100 pixels. So you can make grid items with it as well, and it's really powerful, that kind of stuff. Because also, for example, if you add grid item half, so you wanted it to be 6 columns width, you could just do width divided by 2. Sorry, width, there we go, width divided by 2 like that. And then it'd get half of it like that. So operators are really useful in CSS, in SCSS as well, because they know what these values are. So I can change this to percentages, for example. If I change this to 100% and save it, it automatically works out that I've changed it to a percentage, and it adds the percentage symbol onto the end of things as well. So operators and combined with variables are really, really powerful inside SCSS. So that's a quick overview of SCSS. That is pretty much everything in SCSS that you're going to use over the next couple of years of using SCSS. This is just the beginning for SCSS for you, but I just wanted to just tease you with some of the stuff that you can do with it rather than overblow your mind with it. I hope that was useful, and join me again for another video very soon.